Psalm 4:2-1. Hear me when I call, O God of my righteousness. Thou hast enlarged me when I was in distress. Have mercy upon me and hear my prayer. When the heart is heavy and the night is long, the soul often turns to the one place it knows it will find rest in the presence of God. David, the shepherd king, lifts his voice in the dark, not with despair, but with trust. Thou hast enlarged me when I was in distress, he says, recalling those moments when pressure birthed purpose, when trials became triumphs, like the night he fled from Saul into the wilderness, or when Absalom rose against him. His prayers, whispered among the rocks, were answered with divine enlargement. God does not waste our pain. He stretches us through it. O the sons of men, how long will ye turn my glory into shame? How long will ye love vanity and seek after leasing? Selah. David's lament isn't just personal, it's prophetic. He challenges those who chase shadows, men who trade truth for lies, who love illusions more than the living God, like the sons of Eli who profaned the altar, or like Gehazi who chose silver over integrity. Such people heap shame on what should be sacred. The word "listen to see" was not just in their mouths, but in their hearts. It is a haunting reflection of today's world, too, where many trade their God-given glory for likes, for clout, for empty fame. David paused Selah as if to say, think on this, let it sink deep, but know that the Lord hath set apart him that is godly for himself. The Lord will hear when I call unto him. There is a mystery in being chosen. Joseph in the prison, Esther in the palace, Daniel in Babylon were set apart for purposes greater than their pain. David reminds the listener that God's ear bends toward the godly not because they are perfect, but because they are his. When Samuel anointed David among his brothers, no one saw a king in that shepherd boy, but God did. He sets apart the unnoticed, the broken, the faithful. And when they cry, heaven listens. When they call, the Lord responds, not with delay, but with design. Stand in awe and sin not. Commune with your own heart upon your bed and be still. Selah. How often do we rush into prayer with noise? Yet here, David invites us to stillness, to lay on our beds, not scrolling or striving, but searching our souls in reverence. There's a story told of a rabbi who instructed his students to meditate in silence for hours, because when the soul is quiet, it begins to remember God. The bed is not just for sleep, it is an altar for reflection. In the hush of night, when everything else fades, the heart speaks truest, and it is there that sin is silenced and awe takes its rightful place. Offer the sacrifices of righteousness and put your trust in the Lord. Not all sacrifices bleed. Some are choices, forgiveness instead of revenge, truth instead of manipulation, waiting instead of forcing. These are the sacrifices of righteousness. David had many chances to kill Saul, but he chose restraint. That was worship. In a time when bulls and goats filled altars, David pointed toward something deeper: faith, trust, obedience. When Isaac climbed Mount Moriah with Abraham, it wasn't just a boy and his father. It was a picture of surrender. Trust in the Lord is not passive. It is the laying down of what we want for what God wills. There be many that say, "Who will show us any good?" Lord, lift thou up the light of thy countenance. Upon us in every generation, cynicism rises. People ask, where is the good? They look at broken systems, fractured families, wars, and whisper, is God still here? David doesn't ignore their cry. He answers it with a greater one. Lord, lift the light of your face upon us. Just as the priests blessed the people in Numbers, saying, "The Lord make his face shine upon you." David seeks not a change in circumstances first, but a change in countenance from God. When the face of God shines, even the valley of shadow feels like a garden. Thou hast put gladness in my heart, more than in the time that their corn and their wine increased. Joy is not the same as happiness. David had feasts and fasts, palaces and caves, yet he found a deeper gladness. It wasn't in harvests or wine, but in God himself. There's a tale of a poor farmer who had only one Bible and a candle. A wealthy man asked him, "How are you so happy with so little?" The farmer smiled and said, "David knew that gladness was a gift placed by God, not earned by effort, and it is more intoxicating than wine, more satisfying than gold. I will both lay me down in peace and sleep, for thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety." Peace is not found in walls or weapons, but in the Word. David ends his psalm with serenity, not because all is well around him, but because all is well within him. He lays down not in fear, but in faith, like Peter sleeping in prison the night before his execution, or Jesus resting in the storm-tossed boat. Peace that surpasses understanding wraps them like a blanket. David's world may rage, but his soul is still. Safety is not the absence of danger, but the presence of God. So the psalm closes like a lullaby of the faithful. It began in desperation and ended in deep assurance. David, the warrior and worshiper, teaches us that in every cry there is an answer. In every sleepless night there is a God who sings over us. And in every heart that seeks him, there is joy that no enemy can steal. The psalm is not just a song of the past, it is the anthem of every believer who has ever dared to trust God in the dark. Psalm 4:1, Hear me when I call, O God of my righteousness. Thou hast enlarged me when I was in distress. Have mercy upon me and hear my prayer. David's voice echoes like thunder from the hills of Judah, calling not merely into the silence, but into the heart of a listening God. He doesn't begin with flattery or formalities. He begins with urgency. This is not the prayer of a man praying out of routine. It is the cry of someone who knows what it's like to have been pressed on every side, yet miraculously expanded. Thou hast enlarged me, he says, not in comfort, but in distress. Like a wineskin stretched under heat, David had been shaped by suffering, and God, as he did with Job, had not wasted the affliction. O the sons of men, how long will ye turn my glory into shame? How long will ye love vanity and seek after leasing? Seller, there is something piercing in David's question, almost like a father confronting wayward sons. How long, he asks, not out of curiosity, but out of heartbreak. The sons of men had taken what was holy and treated it with contempt. Think of Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, offering strange fire before the Lord, turning the sacred into spectacle. Or King Saul, who chose vanity over obedience, seeking honor before men instead of favor from God. The love of lies, David warns, always leads to loss. And that ancient question still searches hearts today. How long will we chase what cannot satisfy? But know that the Lord hath set apart him that is godly for himself. The Lord will hear when I call unto him. Imagine a potter setting aside his finest clay, not for a common bowl, but for a vessel of honor. That's how God treats the godly. He sets them apart, not just to bless them, but to bear his image. Think of Ruth, a Moabite widow, grafted into the lineage of the Messiah because she clung to the God of Israel. Or young Samuel, asleep in the tabernacle, hearing the voice of God while others were deaf. David stands tall in this truth, not boasting, but anchored. The godly are not forgotten. When they call, they are heard. Stand in awe and sin not. Commune with your own heart upon your bed and be still. Selah. There's a sacred silence that leads to repentance. David urges the restless to stop. Be still. Not every battle is fought with swords. Some are fought on pillows with open hearts and whispered prayers. A hardened tax collector once stood at the back of the temple, beating his chest, unable to lift his eyes, yet went home justified. God does his deepest work in stillness. When the rush of life fades and we lie alone in the dark, that's where truth meets the soul. And in that communion, sin loses its power. Offer the sacrifices of righteousness and put your trust in the Lord. What does righteousness look like when the temple is silent and the altar cold? It looks like choices made in secret. A widow giving her last coin. A man refusing to gossip though it wins him nothing. A mother forgiving again when she could walk away. These are the living sacrifices Paul would later write about holy and acceptable. Trusting God is rarely loud. It's often found in the trembling hand that still obeys, in the quiet yes when the flesh screams no. David reminds us sacrifice is not about loss, it is about love. There be many that say, who will show us any good? Lord, lift thou up the light of thy countenance upon us. In every age, skepticism lurks. It wore the face of Pharaoh, asking, who is the Lord, that I should obey him? It asked from Pilate's lips, what is truth? And now it murmurs from the shadows, is there any good left? But David's answer doesn't come with arguments. Sit comes with light. Lift up the light of your countenance, he prays. The same light that blinded Saul on the road to Damascus. The same light that pierced the darkness at creation's dawn. When God's face shines, doubt dissolves, and the soul knows goodness again. Thou hast put gladness in my heart, more than in the time that their corn and their wine increased. Imagine the joy of a farmer after a bountiful harvest, barns full, vats overflowing. Yet David claims a gladness greater still, a joy not tied to season or circumstance. This is the joy Paul sang with in prison, the joy Stephen saw as stones flew toward his face, his eyes lifted to heaven. It is the unshakable gladness of the Spirit, planted deep where no thief can steal. David's life had feasts and famines, yet in both he carried a gladness the world couldn't comprehend. I will both lay me down in peace and sleep, for thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety. Safety is not the absence of enemies, it's the presence of God. David had men plotting his death, armies marching against him, even his own son hunting him through the night. Yet he says, I will sleep. Why? Because peace is not a pillow, it is a person. Jesus, sleeping in a storm, modeled this kind of faith, and David, under the stars, with a rock for a pillow, found it too. Real safety is knowing the shepherd watches while we rest, and this is the lesson of Psalm. For it is not just a song, but a sanctuary. Each line is a window into the soul of a man who walked with God through valleys and over peaks. It teaches us that prayer isn't just words, it's war, it's worship, it's wonder. Like Jacob wrestling at midnight, like Hannah pouring out her soul, David invites us into a deeper kind of prayer, one that speaks to the God who listens. There's a scene often forgotten. When David returned the ark to Jerusalem, he danced with all his might before the Lord, unashamed. Why? Because he knew the presence of God was worth more than dignity, more than position, more than approval. This psalm is that same dance, but with words instead of steps. He is not performing for people. He is pleading before the King, and in that plea is an invitation for you, for me, for the weary and the worried, for the broken-hearted, betrayed. The psalm does not demand perfection, it only asks for honesty, and that, perhaps, is why it still echoes through centuries. It speaks to the realness of life, the tears before sleep, the doubts that rise with the dawn, the ache for something eternal in a world always fading. One might recall the prophet Elijah, standing alone on Mount Carmel, fire falling from heaven. Yet even after victory, he fled in fear. Where did he find peace? In a still, small voice. Not in the fire or the wind, but in the whisper. Psalm 4 is that whisper, a voice that tells us, you are heard, you are held, you are his. So let the world chase vanity, boast in grain and wine, wrestle in restlessness. But the people of God, they lie down in peace, not because all is right around them, but because all is right within them. Like David, they know the one who made the stars holds their sleep in his hands. Thus, Psalm 4 becomes not just a psalm to read, but a life to live. A life that calls out when afraid, stands in awe when convicted, offers righteousness when tempted, trusts when it hurts, rejoices when nothing makes sense, and sleeps when others stay up worrying. It is not just the voice of David. It is the voice of every soul that dares to believe. The Lord will hear when I call unto him. And perhaps tonight, as you close your eyes, with burdens still pressing and answers still far off, you might find yourself praying this psalm, not reciting it, but living it. And the same God who heard David will hear you. And the same peace that wrapped the shepherd will cover you too. Psalm 4:2-1. Hear me when I call, O God of my righteousness. Thou hast enlarged me when I was in distress. Have mercy upon me and hear my prayer in the hush of twilight. When the world grows quiet and the soul begins to speak, David lifts his voice. Once more, hear me, he says, not because God is deaf, but because the heart longs to be known. He appeals not to power alone, but to righteousness. God is not just mighty, he is just. And that justice isn't cold, it rescues. It is the kind of righteousness that lifted Joseph from a prison to a palace, the same that pulled Jonah from a fish's belly. David isn't only asking for help, he's remembering the history of mercy. The phrase, "Thou hast enlarged me when I was in distress," is a testimony tucked into a plea. Enlargement doesn't always come in easy ways. The olive is pressed before oil flows. The grape is crushed before the wine pours. David knew the pressure of caves, the sting of betrayal, the ache of waiting. Yet, through every narrow place, God made room for something new, deeper trust, broader vision, wider grace. Like the Red Sea parting, distress became the passage to freedom. The same can be true for us. O the sons of men, how long will the turn my glory into shame? How long will ye love vanity and seek after leasing? Selah, this is the voice of a king addressing his people. But it also sounds like a prophet weeping over a wayward generation. Vanity has always been seductive. Eve stared at the fruit. Samson gazed at Delilah. Demas loved this present world. But glory, true glory, is to walk with God. David's own story was a contrast to this warning. When others sought fame or revenge, he waited for a throne God promised. He did not take it by force. Yet how often today do we see honor traded for applause? Integrity sold for likes. Selah, stop, reflect, return. But know that the Lord hath set apart him that is godly for himself. The Lord will hear when I call unto him. This line humbles and exalts at once. Set apart, a holy separation, not based on status, but on surrender. Consider Mary of Bethany, who sat at Jesus' feet, while others busied themselves with service. Or John, the beloved disciple, resting on Christ's chest during the Last Supper. Set-apart ones are not always center stage. They're often unseen, yet deeply known. David isn't boasting, he's inviting. God listens to the godly, not because they are flawless, but because they are his, chosen, not for perfection, but for pursuit. Stand in awe and sin not. Commune with your own heart upon your bed and be still. SELAH. How revolutionary is this command in a restless age? Stand in awe, be still. In the silence of night, when pretense fades, when the crowd is gone and only your heart remains there, God speaks. Jacob had such a night, alone with his fears, wrestling with the angel until dawn. The stillness became a stage for transformation. Perhaps our problem is not that God isn't speaking, but that we're never still long enough to listen. Awe is the soil where obedience grows. Sin cannot survive where reverence lives. Offer the sacrifices of righteousness and put your trust in the Lord. Righteousness always costs something. For Abraham, it meant laying Isaac on the altar. For Moses, it meant refusing to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. For Jesus, it meant the cross. The righteous sacrifice isn't always dramatic, it's daily. Choosing forgiveness over offense, purity over pleasure, truth over convenience. David doesn't separate faith and obedience, he joins them. Trust is not proven in words alone, but in offerings of integrity, in the marketplace, in the home, in hidden places where no applause echoes. There be many that say, who will show us any good? Lord, lift thou up the light of thy countenance upon us. This cry is the heartbeat of a world worn thin. In every corner, people are searching, scrolling, striving, spending all to find some glimpse of good. And yet David turns not to gifts, but to the giver. Lift up the light of your face. It reminds us of Moses on Sinai, whose face glowed from God's presence, or Stephen, whose face shone like an angel even as stones flew. This is not the light of circumstance, it's the light of communion, and in that light everything looks different. Thou hast put gladness in my heart, more than in the time that their corn and their wine increased. The contrast here is startling. Others rejoice in harvests in abundance and prosperity, but David rejoices in something deeper, more permanent. His joy isn't seasonal. It doesn't depend on the market or the weather. It is planted by God, watered by the Spirit, and blooms even in famine. Consider Paul and Silas singing in prison, or Corrie ten Boom thanking God for fleas in a concentration camp, because they kept guards away from Bible study. This is divine gladness. It is not natural, it is supernatural. I will both lay me down in peace and sleep, for thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety. What a declaration in a dangerous world. David isn't naive, he's trusting. Surrounded by enemies, hunted by his own son, he still lays down in peace. This is faith that rests. It reminds us of a little girl on a sinking ship, fast asleep. When asked how she could rest, she replied, "My father is the captain." David knew his captain, and so do we. True safety isn't found in locked doors or alarm systems, found in the arms of God. There's a beautiful irony in Psalm 4. It begins in desperation and ends in rest. This is the arc of prayer, not always answered with immediate miracles, but always ending in deeper trust. Like Hannah, who poured out her soul and walked away with peace even before she had a child. Prayer changes things, yes, but most of all, it changes us. And consider this Psalm 4 was likely sung at night. It's an evening song. The shadows lengthen, the city grows still, and the soul looks upward. How many have read these words by candlelight or in the glow of midnight tears? How many soldiers before battle, or mothers in worry, or exiles in loneliness, have whispered these same lines and found hope in them? In a world that idolizes noise, Psalm 4 teaches the sacredness of silence. In a time that equates peace with control, it teaches surrender. It shows us that a man with nothing but God can still sleep better than a man with everything but Him. And that lesson echoes not only through Scripture, but through the testimonies of saints through centuries. One thinks of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, writing letters from prison, or Hudson Taylor, asleep on a sinking ship, waking only to say, "I must sleep well tonight, for I have to preach tomorrow." Or that anonymous missionary, buried under a tree with only these words carved in wood, "He trusted God." David would have understood that epitaph well. Psalm 4 is not a relic, it is a roadmap. For anyone burdened, it offers light. For the broken, it offers healing. For the betrayed, it offers justice. For the anxious, it offers peace. And for the weary above all, it offers rest. Not because all is solved, but because all is surrendered. So the next time you lie awake in the night, heart racing, thoughts circling, pick up these words again. Say them slowly. Let each verse become your breath, your prayer, your peace. And you will find, as David did, that the Lord who listens also comforts, and the one who watches never sleeps. He hears you when you call. He enlarges you in distress. He sets you apart. He gives you joy. He makes you dwell in safety. This is not just poetry, it's promise. And it is for you, now, tonight, forever. Psalm 4:2-1. Hear me when I call, O God of my righteousness. Thou hast enlarged me when I was in distress. Have mercy upon me and hear my prayer. David's words pierce through time like a desperate heartbeat. He is not praying to a distant deity, but to the God of his righteousness, the one who has stood beside him in every battle, behind him in every betrayal, and before him in every fear. This cry isn't a first-time plea. It's coming from someone who's been through the fire and come out refined. You enlarged me, he says, as though recalling every narrow corner where God made room, like when he hid in the cave of Adullam and walked out with an army, like when his reputation was slandered and God elevated him instead. There's something raw and real about asking for mercy after recalling past faithfulness. It's almost as if David is saying, Lord, I've seen what you can do. Do it again. Think of a child tugging at their father's sleeve, saying, you helped me last time. I trust you to help again. This is not manipulation, it's relationship. David knows God, not just his power, but his personality, and he approaches him not with polished prayers, but with honest need. How long will ye love vanity, and seek after leasing? Selah. This verse feels like a confrontation, not a shout. It is as if David is watching people walk past gold to pick up gravel. He sees them chasing lies like wind, reaching for hollow dreams while turning their backs on the God who offers fullness. And this isn't just ancient Israelites now. We scroll endlessly, comparing, performing, pretending. We seek vanity as if it were virtue. But David's voice is a divine interruption. How long? In other words, will you wake up before the ruin comes? There's a story of a man who spent his life building a tower of treasure, only to find that the foundation he built on was sand. When the storm came, everything fell. That's what vanity does. It offers a peak with no structure beneath. And David, standing on the rock, urges others to leave the illusion and return to truth, but know that the Lord hath set apart him, that is godly for himself. The Lord will hear when I call unto him. This is identity. This is security. This is the holy confidence of someone who knows they've been marked by heaven. David isn't boasting in himself. He's declaring what God has done. He has been set apart, like a vessel in the tabernacle, or the prophet Jeremiah called from the womb. David is not common, and neither is anyone who belongs to God. You may not feel set apart, but feelings don't define favor. Imagine being on a battlefield, surrounded by noise, and suddenly a royal banner is lifted over your head. That's what this verse does. It reminds us we're not alone. The Lord hears, not because our voice is loud, but because our hearts are His. Stand in awe and sin not. Commune with your own heart upon your bed and be still, Selah. There is a sacredness to nighttime that most of us ignore. The day is full of movement, masks, and noise, but at night it's just you and your heart. That's when God often whispers. David invites us into holy self-examination, not condemnation, but contemplation. It's like spiritual inventory, not just what have I done today, but who have I become today? The lines stand in awe, and sin not suggests that a fresh awareness of God's greatness can protect us from falling into compromise. Awe is a guardrail. The more we gaze at Him, the less sin appeals to us. It's hard to lie when you've just encountered truth. Hard to lust when your heart is full of light. Offer the sacrifices of righteousness and put your trust in the Lord. This is about consistency in the quiet. The sacrifices of righteousness aren't burnt offerings, they're daily decisions. It's choosing kindness when bitterness is easier. It's saying no to that temptation you think no one sees. It's staying faithful when no reward is in sight. Trusting the Lord here means letting go of results and holding fast to obedience. It's the story of Noah building an ark when there were no clouds, of Abraham raising a knife with tears in his eyes, of Jeremiah preaching to a people who never listened. These were sacrifices. These were acts of trust. David is inviting us into that same rhythm of righteous surrender. There be many that say, who will show us any good? Lord, lift thou up the light of thy countenance upon us. The question is old, but never outdated. Where is the good? It's asked. In war zones, hospital rooms, broken homes, and quiet hearts. People want signs, answers, quick fixes. But David doesn't pray for changed circumstances. He prays for divine presence. Lift the light of your face upon us, he says, echoing the priestly blessing in Numbers 6. Because when God's face shines, fear fades. When his countenance is lifted toward us, hope rises. It's what Moses saw on Sinai, what Peter glimpsed on the Mount of Transfiguration, what John beheld in Revelation. The light of his face changes everything, even if nothing else changes. Thou hast put gladness in my heart, more than in the time that their corn and their wine increased. David draws a line between joy and prosperity, and he places them in separate columns. The world rejoices in full barns and heavy wallets, but he has something better. God has put gladness in his heart, not gladness based on promotion or popularity, but a joy rooted in presence, not performance. It's like a well that doesn't run dry, even in drought. Like Paul, content in chains. Like the woman at the well who forgot her water jar because she found living water. This is not circumstantial. Hapeekaboo sits spirit-birthed joy, and it's available to all who seek the giver, not just his gifts. I will both lay me down in peace and sleep. For thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety. There's power in that word only. Thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety. Not guards, not gates, only God. David had soldiers, walls, riches, but none of these gave him sleep. His rest came from knowing who held his life. This is a sleep deeper than physical. It is soul rest, like Jesus, asleep on a stormy boat, like Peter, chained between guards, yet slumbering before his trial. Peace doesn't mean the storm stops, it means you trust the one who rides the waves. David had learned that sleep wasn't a luxury. It was a spiritual act of trust. The beauty of Psalm 4 is how it carries us from conflict to calm, from chaos to communion. It's like walking through a storm and finding shelter, not in a building, but in a presence. That's what makes this psalm timeless. It isn't just about David's enemies or his reign. It's about every human heart trying to rest in a restless world. It whispers to the overthinker, the betrayed, the misunderstood. It calls to the anxious, the grieving, the silent sufferer. It doesn't promise a life without conflict, but it offers a life anchored in trust, and that anchor holds. Perhaps this is why Psalm 4 has been read by hospital beds, in trenches, behind prison walls, and in quiet corners of childhood bedrooms. Its words are balm. Its rhythm is steady. Its truths are eternal. And its invitation is open. So tonight, whether you are celebrated or cast down, whether life is overflowing or barely holding together, turn to these words. Let them be your lullaby and your anchor, and say with David, not as but with conviction, I will lay me down in peace and sleep. For thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety, because in a world of uncertainty, this remains true. The God who hears is the God who holds, and that is enough. Psalm 4:1. Hear me when I call, O God of my righteousness. Thou hast enlarged me when I was in distress. Have mercy upon me, and hear my prayer. There are some prayers that are whispered, and some that are cried out. This one feels like both. David isn't just praying from comfort, he's praying from the crucible, from a place of pressure. Distress is not an interruption of God's plan. It's often the place where His plan is revealed. In the same way that a pearl forms under pressure, or gold is refined by fire, David says, "You enlarged me when I was in distress." It's an upside-down truth. The tight places often lead to wide spaces. God doesn't only deliver from distress, He delivers through it. And the phrase, "Have mercy upon me," reminds us that no matter how strong David was, no matter how favored, he knew he needed mercy. The kind of mercy that met Peter when he sank, that caught the thief on the cross in his final breath, that turned Saul the persecutor into Paul the preacher. This is the mercy David leans on, and so must we. No pedigree or position exempts us from that need. Oh, the sons of men, how long will they turn my glory into shame? How long will ye love vanity and seek after leasing? Selah. There's a kind of sorrow in David's voice, Hera, grief, that the very people God wants to bless are choosing barrenness. He isn't just angry, he's brokenhearted. It's like watching someone toss aside an inheritance for a bowl of soup, like Esau did. Glory turned to shame, truth exchanged for lies. Still today, we see people seeking leasing falsehood as if it were treasure. The tragedy of it is not only that they are deceived, but that they prefer deception. And David, pausing with that sacred word Selah, invites us to reflect. Are we loving what cannot last? But know that the Lord hath set apart him that is godly. For himself the Lord will hear when I call unto him. Here David draws a sharp contrast between the sons of men and the set apart. The godly, he says, are not forgotten in the crowd. They are known, they are chosen, and they are not chosen merely to receive. They are chosen for God Himself, not for a mission or miracle first, but for communion, like Enoch, who walked with God, or Mary, who sat at Jesus' feet while others worked. When we realize we are set apart for God, not just from the world, intimacy replaces insecurity. And when the godly call, heaven listens. Stand in awe and sin not. Commune with your own heart upon your bed and be still. Select. This is a different kind of command, not about doing more, but about being still, about allowing wonder to drown out worry. David knows that the antidote to sign isn't just resistance, sits reverence. When we stand in awe of God, sin begins to lose its grip. Think of Isaiah, who upon seeing the Lord high and lifted up, cried, "Woe is me." Or John, who fell like a dead man at the feet of Jesus in Revelation. Awe purifies, and David invites us to take our hearts to bed with us, not to be burdened, but to commune, to sit quietly with truth until it reshapes us. Offer the sacrifices of righteousness, and put your trust in the Lord. The sacrifices of righteousness aren't always public. They're often offered in secret, the integrity kept when no one would know, the kindness given without applause, the truth spoken in love when silence would be safer. These are the daily offerings of a heart aligned with heaven. David is teaching us something powerful. Righteousness and trust go hand in hand. To trust God is to obey Him, even when the result is unclear, even when others take shortcuts, even when obedience costs. Because ultimately, trust isn't shown in emotion, it's shown in action. There be many that say, "Who will show us any?" Good Lord, lift thou up the light of thy countenance upon us. This line feels like today. The world is asking, where is the good? News cycles overflow with chaos. Hearts are heavy with grief, and people are searching. But while others are looking for good around them, David looks for good above him. Lift up your face upon us, he prays, because one glance from God outweighs 1,000 earthly pleasures. It's what Moses wanted on Sinai, what the blind man longed for in the crowd, what every human heart ultimately aches for his presence. That's where the real good is found. Thou hast put gladness in my heart, more than in the time that their corn and their wine increased. The world's joy is circumstantial. It rises with profit and falls with loss. But the joy God gives is unshaken. It doesn't depend on what's in the barnet. David had seen seasons of feasting and famine, but the deepest joy came not from harvest, but from holiness. And he knew this gladness wasn't self-manufactured. Thou hast put gladness in my heart. God is the giver of joy, not surface level laughter, but a soul-deep gladness that endures through valleys, storms, and tears. I will both lay me down in peace and sleep, for thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety. This verse is a benediction over anxiety. David, a man pursued by enemies, betrayed by his own son, surrounded by strife, still says, I will sleep, because his safety isn't rooted in situation, it's rooted in sovereignty. God makes him dwell in safety, not his strategy, not his sword, not his surroundings, just God. And the same is true for us. The world says, you'll rest when it's all figured out. But faith says, rest because he's already working. The bed becomes an altar. Sleep becomes an act of surrender. David's journey in this psalm is ours too. From desperate cry to peaceful rest. From tension to trust. He begins in need and ends in assurance. And the bridge that carries him across is prayer. Not prayer as performance, but as presence. Real, raw, reflective. Think of Daniel praying toward Jerusalem, even when it might cost him his life. Of Jesus in Gethsemane, sweating blood, yet surrendering. Of Paul and Silas singing at midnight. These weren't prayers of convenience, they were prayers of conviction. Psalm 4 echoes in each of them. This psalm invites us to unburden, to trade stress for stillness, to replace striving with surrender. David shows us that we don't have to wait for perfect circumstances to find peace. We just need to meet God in the middle of the mess. That's where rest begins. And perhaps most beautiful of all is the shift that happens between verses. He starts with "Hear me when I call" and ends with "I will sleep." That is the power of prayer, not us, but that it changes everything within us. We enter anxious, we exit assured. We enter crying, we exit confident. So when the night comes and fear whispers, remember David's song. Let it become your own. Speak it slowly. Let every verse tuck you in like a blanket of truth. And know this: just as God watched over David in the wilderness, He watches over you. Just as He gave him peace, He will give it to you. Psalm 4 is not just a bedtime psalm, it's a life posture, a heart that calls, reflects, trusts, and rests. And it promises this: the one who hears you when you call will hold you while you sleep. And that, beloved, is peace the world can't touch. Psalm 4:1 Hear me when I call, O God of my righteousness. Thou hast enlarged me when I was in distress. Have mercy upon me and hear my prayer. The very first line is like thunder rolling over the hills of the soul. David doesn't beg as a stranger, he pleads as a son. He's speaking to the God of his righteousness, not just the God of his rescue. This tells us something about David. His confidence isn't in his own goodness, but in God's character. Like a child calling out in the dark, he knows who he belongs to, and that belonging gives boldness. His cry for mercy is not desperation without hope. It's desperation fueled by history. This is the God who showed up when the lion roared, when the bear attacked, when Goliath mocked. He knows mercy has come before, and mercy will come again. The phrase "enlarged me when I was in distress" is so rich. It's as if David says, "You didn't just get me out, you grew me through it." It wasn't escape that defined his testimony. It was expansion. Like Joseph, whose prison became the hallway to Pharaoh's throne, or Esther, whose pressure-filled palace moment turned her into a deliverer. Distress in God's hands is not destruction, it's development. O the sons of men, how long will they turn my glory into shame? How long will ye love vanity and seek after leasing? Selah H. David turns from heaven to earth, here from prayer to plea. He looks at people who should know better, yet choose worse. His words are soaked in sorrow. He sees the downward spiral of those who once bore glory, honor, truth, beauty, and traded it for shadows, vanity, and lies. He's not angry like a tyrant. He's grieving like a prophet, like Jeremiah, weeping over Jerusalem, or Jesus, standing above the city, crying, "How often I would have gathered you." How long, David asks. How long, until the prodigal remembers the Father's house? But know that the Lord hath set apart him that is godly for himself. The Lord will hear when I call unto him. This is not a boast, it's a boundary. David declares who he is by declaring whose he is. God has set apart the godly not for a show, not for superiority, but for himself. Think of it: God, the maker of galaxies, wants people for himself, not for what they do, but for who they are with him, like the Levites, who received no land inheritance, because the Lord himself was their portion. Like Anna the prophetess, who stayed in the temple, worshiping day and night, set apart ones may be hidden from the world's spotlight, but they shine in the courts of heaven. Stand in awe and sin not. Commune with your own heart upon your bed, and be still, Solace. What a whisper in a world of noise. Stand in awe, not of yourself, not of your accomplishments, but of God. This isn't fear that pushes away, but awe that draws near. Like Moses before the burning bush, shoes off, heart open, and David, ever the shepherd of hearts, invites us into the secret chamber, your bed, the place of rest, reflection, and quiet honesty. Commune with your heart, wrestle with yourself, pour out your soul like Hannah. Be still like Samuel, who said, "Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth." Selah. Don't rush this offer, the sacrifices of righteousness, and put your trust in the Lord. Righteousness always has a cost. Cain gave what was easy. Abel gave what was right. The widow gave 2 coins. The rich young ruler couldn't give up one thing. God doesn't ask for quantity. He asks for purity, for obedience over appearance. And David ties it directly to trust. Why? Because real righteousness flows from real faith. When you trust that God is good, you offer good things. You obey, even when it's costly, because you believe He sees, He rewards, He keeps His promises. And that kind of faith is better than any burnt offering. There be many that say, "Who will show us any good?" Lord, lift thou up the light of thy countenance upon us. The world is cynical, always asking, where is the good? But David doesn't join the chorus. He lifts his eyes. He doesn't search for good around him. He seeks the face of the good one. Lift up the light of your countenance, he says. That's the ancient blessing from Numbers. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you. When God's face shines, shadows flee, fear dissolves, and the soul knows, I am seen, I am safe, I am surrounded. One glimpse of his countenance outweighs 1,000 answers. Thou hast put gladness in my heart, more than in the time that their corn and their wine increased. This is joy that the market can't manufacture. It's not dependent on the harvest. It's not seasonal. It's not temporary. It's God-given, heaven-born, spirit-sustained gladness, the kind that blooms in famine, that laughs in lions' dens, that sings in prisons. David says plainly, they rejoice in crops. I rejoice in Christ. The world may feast, but I am full. Because joy is not in what's gathered, it's in who is present. And when God is near, the soul overflows. Even in drought, I will both lay me down in peace and sleep. For thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety. It's one thing to lay down, it's another to sleep. Anxiety lays down and stares at the ceiling. Faith lays down and rests. And David's secret isn't in self-soothing, it's in surrender. Thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety. Only, not armies, not walls, not wealth, just God. This kind of sleep is a holy thing. It's the sleep Jesus had in a storm. the kind Paul had before facing Caesar, the kind Peter had in prison, even when execution was scheduled. This is trust. This is peace. This is Psalm 4 coming to life. And in a way, this entire psalm is an invitation into the rhythm of heaven. Speak honestly, reflect deeply, offer righteousness, trust fully, rejoice truly, rest peacefully. It's not just a prayer, it's a path. Think of the times you've stood on the edge of decisions, heart racing, or when betrayal cracked your spirit like dry wood, or when fear wrapped around you like a fog. That's when Psalm 4 breathes. That's when David's words become more than ancient poetry. They become living water. They show us that you don't have to be fearless to be faithful. David was hunted, mocked, wounded, and yet he slept. Why? Because fear may knock. Faith answers. Because peace isn't about quiet circumstances. It's about knowing the one who commands the storm. There's a reason this psalm has outlived empires. Because it speaks the language of the human soul, raw, reaching, and reverent. And it leads us to a God who hears, who holds, who helps, who heals. So as the stars come out and the world slows down, let Psalm 4 be your song. Not just a bedtime tradition, but a soul-deep declaration. And let its truths settle you like a gentle hand on a weary shoulder. He hears you. He sees you. He is with you. And tonight, yes, even tonight you will lay down in peace and sleep, because the same God who steadied David still holds you close.